Hello, BookTube, and welcome back. And this is my book to film, and it's still a catch up on New World's November. And this was from Time Travel Week, and I did the obvious. Is the Time Machine by H.G. Wells, written in 1895 or published in 1895 in book form. This is the Norton Critical Edition, and this is the 1960 George Pal. Sorry, the George Pal. The first filmed edition film of the Time Machine, and I always think it's 1950s for some reason, but it's not. It stars Rod Taylor, Whit Bissell, and there's an Yvette Mimieux as Weena. And it's really good. It's got a really good atmosphere. I hadn't seen it in a long time, but we'll get to that in a moment. And also too, here's the SF Masterworks that's put out by Golan's of the book. It's an interesting cover. It's short work. It's just over, in this version it's just over 100 pages, I think. Yeah, like 125, and in here it's like 70 some pages. So it's very short. It had a sort of a gestation period, I guess you would say, for many years, with H.G. Wells. When it was finally published, it was done in a periodical, there was many false attempts at it in a periodical. But the story basically is about a time traveler. He's unnamed, and there's one friend, Philby, that is throughout is the friend in 1890, the 1895-ish, late Victorian period. There's no exact date. I don't remember. The film has a date, but the story doesn't. And it's told in sort of flashback. It's a story that he comes back from his travels and tells his friends, who are like, there's a philosopher, there's a medical man, and they're named by professions. And the time traveler had created a machine to go to the future, to the past, and there's sort of philosophical and scientific discussions of what time is, like to move in time, the fourth dimension, and it was based on some sort of theoretical science of the time. According to a supplementary material in here. And he tells the story of going to the future, like to the year, I think it's 10 or 12,000, so many thousands of years in the future. And he finds a society of humans. They're humans, but they are basically androgynous. They're very elf-like. You can't really tell male or female between them. And they don't have much of a language, but the environment is totally like, it's like he described it as like a Garden of Eden. There were no diseases, there were no weeds, there's flowers and lots of fruit. But he also finds out there's another sort of splinter of humanity in the future there that live underground. The ones on top, that are the androgynous creature, the humans, or what becomes of humans, are called the Eloi. And the ones that live underground are called Morlocks. It's, these are sort of names that are sort of, everybody knows, even if they've never read this or seen the film. It's sort of part of sort of pop culture, in a sense, that these names are known. And the Morlocks are descendants of workers that sort of provided power and energy and whatnot for the ones that lived up, the higher hierarchy that lived on the surface. But because they've lived for many thousands of years underground, they've changed. They're light sensitive. They're sort of creatures, and well, the Eloi on the surface eat the fruits and the bounty of the the plant life. There doesn't seem to be really any other animals there. Um, but the Morlocks sort of take care, in a sense, of the Eloi. They grow them like cattle because that's their food supply, and they take whenever they need. And meanwhile, the time traveler's machine is sort of captured and taken underground with the Morlocks. So he needs to get this back. So he travels down a shaft to sort of, but that's where he learns about the Morlocks. But prior to that, he goes travel like Weena. He saves Weena from drowning when none of her kind would. Just sort of they weren't concerned with her drowning, but he saved her, and she sort of latches on to him. Well, he thinks it's a she. It's not really explained too much. They don't go into too much detail in the story. But he travels a little bit and he finds what he thinks. Well, it's a museum, and he learns a few things of the future. Very little though, but he finds a sort of weapon because he's gonna, confront the Morlocks and get his machine back. And it doesn't quite happen that way. And while he's returning, it's nighttime, and that's where they sort of hunt. The Morlocks hunt basically, and they take Weena. She disappears, and then he does finally get his time machine because they sort of open up the doorway where they took it into to sort of trap him, but he flees back in time, and that's where he is telling the story. And there's a lot of discussion in the story with. About how society, like the humans, changed. Um, it's like it's the workers, and they evolved in a certain way, and then it was the hierarchy. So there's a lot of discussion of sort of politics, evolution, of humans and species. And that's what a lot of this is like. There's a lot of talk of debate between the four or five that are there. And as I say, the story had sort of a long gestation period. He'd written something earlier called the Chronic Argonaut, like chronology, chronic time, and Argonauts from like the Jason and the Argonauts, travelers. So time traveling. And then he started writing The Time Machine, and it was in a publication for a while, but then that, changed editors and it stopped. He stopped writing it. And then he attempted again, and there's differences in all these. And it's the differences are interesting. And then finally in 1894 or 93 it was done in periodical again, and then 1895 it was in book form. But all those attempts, like the Chronic Argonaut is in here in the critical edition, the Norton Critical Edition, as well as the other attempts to where it was stopped, and not the full text, but some chapters that are very different, because there's other discussions that he has, because he comes back a couple times. He goes into the past, he goes farther into the future, and they talk about evolution. They talk about how they don't believe that the earth would be that it's temperate, it's perfect temperature and everything like that far in the future. Like it's going to actually, get closer to the sun, and eventually the sun will stop moving. And he talks about, Charles Darwin's son, who actually has proposed one of these things where the sun will get larger and red and will engulf, Mercury and Venus, and then eventually the Earth will stop spinning, and it will face the sun all the time. And they talk about how that's will happen, but he's saying that it doesn't quite, there's differences, there's other things that happen, so there's discussion back and forth, lots of talk, lots of discussion, debating about society, about a communal society, communist society, or leftist society. It's like there's a lot of talk about this, which is quite interesting. And there's also a sort of a different ending that is in here. That's from a manuscript, and it's got underlines of where. That he was editing this, and it was never printed, but it's quite interesting because he does come back again, at the end, and but yeah, and then there's so it was done in the new review, like the one attempt was, and they got some of the chapters, and then they've got some from a manuscript, and then all the prefaces that H.G. Wells did for all the editions in his lifetime. And he didn't think too highly of the story, actually, but it has come down to be a classic of science fiction, and it's in some ways a deciding text, deciding of pre-science fiction, and this was really like science fiction, like it was the beginning of everything, and it was so influential. It's scientific romance, that's what he called it, and it was called at the time, but it sort of was a marking point, because prior to that, a lot of there wasn't that much science in it, and there's whether correct science or not, but it's science in this story. And then the rest of this is there are, which is interesting, there's several articles that he wrote that are scientific sort of essays, short essays, and they're on the subjects like of evolution, about the Earth, the future of the Earth and so forth, and the sun, dying, and the Earth stops spinning, and it's quite interesting. And there's also quite a bit of there's I haven't read every bit in here. There's still bits that I need to read, which I will get to eventually. But it's sort of like there's a chapter here, a section called Scientific and Social Context. So I've glanced at it, and it does go into a little more about the discussions that are talked about the science and the social aspects of societies. The workers, changing and evolving in a certain way. To be critical of it, it's a little too convenient of how Wells puts it out, but it's still interesting. And then there are a number of essays for sort of criticism back to early stuff, as well as a little more modern. So that's basically the story. And then the film in 1960 is quite a bit different. It starts out sort of similar. He stumbles in, and he tells the stories to his friends. But when he goes into the future, they are not androgynous. The Eloi are not androgynous. There's no way that Weena, Yvette Mimieux, is androgynous. She's very female and very feminine. But before he gets there, while he's traveling through time, he stops off at the First World War, and then the Second World War, and then he stops even Then he goes up to the future, but he's like a million years or more, millions of years in the future. And but each time, because you see, those are things that are put in 1960, because in 1960 you do know about First World War and Second World War. H.G. Wells, writing in 1895, did not know about the First World War and Second World War. So, so those are interpolations of the film. The well, George Pell had a hand, but it was, the screenplay was by David Duncan, and it's directed by George Pell. But he had a lot of say in the film, and the design and everything, design of the time machine itself. But anyway, and it's in the, he's named now, he's George in the time machine. It's sort of convenient because it's like H.G. George, so he's sort of H.G. Wells in a sense, but also the director's name is George, so convenient. So he's in the future, but he finds out, like, he learns Weena takes him to, it works about the same thing. So it's a paradise. There's no weeds. They're very simple, the Eloi. And his time machine gets captured by the Morlocks. It gets dragged into their lair underground. He saves Weena from drowning while they're watching her drown. They're not concerned, so she sort of latches onto him a little bit, and then, like, but he wants to get his machine back, and what happens is that Weena takes him somewhere. He says, "Oh, the rings talk," and there's some recording, so he learns about what's happened in the past times, and it looks like there was like a 300-year war from the east and west, and it's a nuclear holocaust, basically, that because he sees that in 1960 something, where he stops at some point and there's nuclear bombs that are being dropped, but this war apparently or other wars just continued for like 300 years. And he learns that humanity, went underground to survive, because the air was bad, but some stayed on the top of the ground, so they sort of evolved differently. And that's how, it gets it out of the way of the social context of workers, and a separation of society, that's in the story. So, the Morlocks developed underground, and they developed this in the same way because they can't see very well in light, and because they've had the sirens, like he stops and you hear about the sirens of the Second World War, and then all of a sudden there's the all clear siren, to, after the bombing is done. The Morlocks have trained, in a sense, like the Eloi, that when they do the siren, the Eloi sort of are dazed and hypnotized, and they walk into the lair of the Morlocks, who then, obviously eat them, because they're cannibalistic, but they've evolved into other creatures, like almost like mole rats, because they're practically blind, and they live underground, and they only come out at nighttime. So and while this is happening, he's gonna, like, he finds out all this kind of thing, that what's happened in 300 years. He gets taken to a library where there's books, but the books are just disintegrating. They've forgotten everything. They're just a very simple people, the Eloi, but there's no old people because the Morlocks cull them and eat them. So he's gonna go down a shaft, like it's a chimney shaft, there, and he finds out that that the alarm goes off, the siren, and Weena gets is hypnotized and gets taken in. So he goes down. he frees them, he fights them, and he frees them, and he destroys their lair pretty well. He starts it on fire. He saves everybody that's there, all the Eloi, and then they open up thing as a trap for him, but he gets his machine, and he goes back in time, and that's where it starts. The film starts where he stumbles in and he tells the story, but then he goes back and he takes 3 books. They don't say what books, but he takes 3 books with him. And that's basically where it ends. It's a fabulous film. The effects are pretty good. Like, there's some really good effects in it. There's some that have dated. You could tell that they're miniatures and things like that, especially where the lava comes in over the cars and things like that. But the stop motion photography is really good for things like the flowers and the growing of apples, budding of apples and growing. And in here they've got a little, it's called the documentary The Time Machine, A Journey Back. It's hosted by Rod Taylor because he was still alive. I'm not sure why they didn't get Yvette Mimieux, because she was still alive for this. But they filmed a few little extra scenes in it as well. But they talk about, the production of it and what happened to the actual props of the time machine, the little time, because I didn't mention, but in the film there's a little box, like it's all Victorian, so everything looks Victorian, and there's a little Victorian box that has a little model of the time machine that's sitting on a velvet like inlay, and he takes it and it goes to the future. And it's really cute. It's really cute. And apparently George Pal sort of snagged this when he left, but it got burnt in his house when there were fires. So that was destroyed. The bigger time machine was sold at an auction in the early 70s, but then it reappeared, or the remnants of it reappeared like 3 or 4 years later, about the mid 70s, in a thrift shop. So somebody bought it and they restored it, and it's been sort of kept since then and been used as a prop for other things, like George Pal. There's pictures with George Pal in it before he died, and even Carl Sagan in it, and then also Carl Sagan, I think, filmed with the little model as well. But they also did something that was kind of neat. They brought back, Rod Taylor does a little skit with coming back during the First World War to see his friend Philby, and because he had found out in the main film that was done in 1960, like during the storyline, that he's in 1917, I think, and he meets Philby's son, who he mistakes for his friend, David Philby, and so, but he finds out that he had died in the war a year earlier. So in this extra bit in the documentary, he comes back and he tries to talk his friend Philby into come to the future, but he doesn't tell him that you're going to be dead within a week, a few days or whatever. But Philby doesn't want to go, and then it sort of ends with George, the time traveler, saying that he'll try again. He'll go a couple days before he actually crashes in France in an airplane. So that's where it sort of ends. And then there's another little bit where there was the skeptic. I forget the character's name, but he talks about that it's been 32 years since he'd seen his friend and he disappeared and all this kind of stuff. So it was interesting. But I'm not sure why they didn't bring Yvette Mimieux in for this. But yeah, I think they kept the sensibilities of the story to a certain extent, like the main story, but the big part of the Time Machine book is talking about society and evolution and things like that, which is completely out of the it's implicit, some of it, into the film, but they threw out the window basically the aspect of the evolution of the workers becoming the Morlocks, and the overlords becoming the Eloi. But yeah, it was a good film. I enjoyed it. It's a long time since I don't know. I probably saw the last time I saw The Time Machine was probably 30 years ago. It looked glorious in a Blu-ray. It looked really good, and it really has a good atmosphere. I love the sets, and everything like that. It's late Victorian, and it really has that feel to it. And it's probably 40 years since I'd read the book. And there was lots of stuff that I'd forgotten about in the book, especially the long sort of talk discussions with it. And I look forward to slowly, reading through the rest of the stuff in here, because, as I say, I've got 2 bookmarks. I've got probably 60 or 70 pages to read yet, I guess, out of this. It's not very long. It's 260 pages. But yeah, these are good ones, and it's relatively cheap. It's not. You probably can get it for practically the same price as a normal edition of The Time Machine, and this has so much more in it. That is really neat. If you're interested in that, and you're interested in the more aspect, this is the one to get. This is a good transfer. It looks really good. The Premier collection, but it just doesn't have much extras. It's had the documentary, but no commentary, which was sad, and no booklet, because it would have been nice to have a nice little booklet. There are some cards, sort of. It's a dual one too. It's DVD, and see, these are some cards. They're screen captures, and that's Rod Taylor and Weena. Yvette Mimieux in color, and then this is actually a still from the thing, obviously, and that's not even in the film. And then this is another capture for the card, and they're kind of neat. There's a nice little aspect to it. And then this is the one of the I guess posters for it, which is kind of neat. But yeah, it's an okay one. But as I say, I always like the extras that you get with films, the booklets, and as well as the commentaries. But that's it for Book to Film this week, and I hope to have the I don't have it to hand here. Make Room by Harry Harrison, which is Soylent Green, and I hope to have that for next week. Fingers crossed, and knock on wood. Take care, BookTube. See you next time.